all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see the promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. Why do I fear? Oh, the evidence is here. Why do I fear? Oh, the evidence is here. Why do I fear? Oh, the evidence is here. Why do I fear? Oh, the evidence is here.
In 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 14 and 16, God is speaking to Solomon. Then if my people will humble themselves and pray and search for me and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from them. I will hear from heaven and forgive their sins and heal their land. I will listen wide awake to every prayer made in this place. For I have chosen this temple and sanctified it to be my home forever. My eyes and my heart shall always be here.
Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Yeah. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. To see you high and lifted up, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing, holy, holy, holy. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. Open the eyes. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. See you high and lifted up, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing, holy, holy, holy. High and lifted up, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing, holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. I want to see you. Open the eyes. Open my eyes. Yes, open my eyes. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. All right, amen. Let's bring Ken up for the word.
One of my favorite scriptures to preach about is the one about spit and mud and miracles. And that's what today's is. A couple weeks ago, Shelley preached on Jesus calling himself the light of the world. And today, this story actually continues. The setting is still the Festival of Tabernacles, which in the Jewish calendar falls around fall harvest time. And every night during that festival, 4 giant bowls, like enough to hold lots and lots of firewood, were filled to the brim, set on fire to illuminate the night sky. On top of that, people danced with blazing torches. It was a light show to pierce the night sky. And here, Jesus meets a man who lived his entire life in darkness. He never saw the light of day. So take a moment, like 1 minute, and less than a minute. What's the darkest place you have ever experienced? All right, time's up. If you can't figure out one that fast, you haven't been in a dark spot. Okay, how many of you thought of a cave? Like, go to Mammoth Cave and they pull this little stunt on you. When you're in the deepest, darkest part, they turn off all the lights. And you can taste the darkness. You can feel it. It's just so thick. And they do turn it back on. But there's another way to be in a dark place, right? And that's to be emotionally in a dark place where you see no hope. In fact, people even say, I don't see any, light. I have no way out. There is no light at the end of the tunnel that they're in. Now, you don't have to share what this one is unless you want to, but think about that darkest place in your life for a moment. And I want you to think about this man born blind. He's been living in that spot. He's been living in this spot where the darkness of his life is not just because he cannot see, but there is no hope for him to see. And because he's born blind, he's been excluded from a lot of things in community. Not allowed to go into the temple and worship like everyone else because of his deformity. We're going to take a look at this story, and in it we're going to also examine 4 kinds of people in the story. And I'm going to ask you to imagine which one of these 4 kinds of people would your best friend say you're most like. Not you, because, we all lie to ourselves. But somebody who really knows you well would say, yeah, you're kind of like that person or that person. I'll tell you who the people are, so when we read about them, you can kind of think, I wonder what. One will be the neighbors who live nearby this blind man. One would be his actual parents. Another group would be the Pharisees or the religious leaders. And then the last one would be the man born blind himself. By the way, this episode took place right after, remember Kevin was talking and teaching last week about Jesus saying, that I am, and he used this word I am, and people immediately picked up rocks to what? Build an altar? No, they're going to rock out on him. They were going to kill him. And so Jesus barely escapes being lynched, but he must be thinking, I'm trying to get across to these people who I am. I tried to tell them I am the light of the world, or I am the truth. I think what I'll do now is I'll show them. There are times in Jesus' ministry where he told parables, and there are other times when he kind of acted them out. He did things that were a symbol or a parable of a deeper truth, and this is one of them. And so I call it the story of spit and mud and miracles. Follow with me in John chapter 9. You can look in your books or up on the screen. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Well, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, what's the next word? We must do the work of him who sent me. This is not all on Jesus, right? This is, all of us need to be thinking, while there is time, we should be doing the work of God. Night is coming when no one can work. And while I'm in the world, here he uses that phrase again. What is it? I am the light of the world. Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and he put it on the man's eyes. I know that's gross. We'll get into the gross part later. It's my favorite part. And then he says, go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. And this word means sent. And so the man went and washed and came home seeing. And his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? And some claimed that he was, and others said, no, he only looks like him. But the man himself said, I am the man. Well then, how were your eyes opened? They demanded. He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes, and then he told me to go to Siloam and wash, and so I went and washed, and I could see. Well, where is this man, they asked. I don't know, he said. So they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been born blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees asked him how he had received his sight. Well, he put mud on my eyes, and then I washed, and now I see. Now, one of the things I find interesting, almost funny, the disciples are walking through town. They see a man born blind, and here's this guy, right there, blind man, and they start talking about him as if he's not even there, right? Hey, how do you think this guy was born blind? He's right here. He's not deaf. He's blind. He can hear every word you're saying. And Jesus is, going to speak to this worldview, this cultural view that people assumed if you had something like that going on, somebody messed up. It could be your parents. It could be you. It could be because demons and sin and germs, they all kind of go together. So your first table talk question is kind of addressing that one. It's not meant to be a deep philosophical 30-minute discourse. Just a quick little thought here and there. Why do bad things happen to good people? Go for it. All right, on the average, good or evil? How many of you are basically good people? Oh, come on, put your hands up. You all know don't be so humble. You're not robbing people right now. You're being good people. Anybody have anything bad happen to them? Ever? Did you ever ask the question, why is this happening to me, right? That's a very common thing. Well, back then, the common thought was, it's because somebody somewhere somehow messed up. They sinned. There are other reasons. Maybe, did anybody think of genetics? Like, some people get cancer, and it's genetically passed on from one family member to another. What about bad things happen? You're driving down the road, minding your own business, obeying all the laws for the first time, and somebody pulls out in front of you and smashes your car. That's a mistake, right? Probably. Accidents happen. There's all kinds of reasons that bad things happen. without any, you can try and drill down on it, but it's still not all human suffering is a result of sin. Amazingly, this man's blindness, Jesus says, is to what? Give God glory. Like, that's an answer nobody thought of, right? And so this more remarkable work of Jesus right now is that Jesus is not only going to give God glory by bringing sight to a man born blind, never saw anything ever, which just the biological thing that has to happen is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. But he's going to demonstrate to the world that he's the light of the world. It's killing two birds with one stone. Sometimes bad things happen as a punishment. Anybody ever get punished? Oh, come on, you guys are not that good. Okay, so guys only. How many of you guys ever got a whooping when you were growing up? Anybody? Sure, right? Did it do any good? Eventually, maybe a little bit, right? Maybe you don't do all those same things in the presence of your parents anyway. And anybody ever have nobody catch you doing something wrong, but there was still a consequence that happened later on? Like, there was a follow-up, a heavenly follow-up that kind of caught you in the end. If you live a lifetime of abuse, whether it's addiction or whatever, and then later on, you can say, I'm sorry till the cows come home, but that doesn't necessarily make the consequences of that abuse disappear, right? A lot of times as a child, I think, well, if I disobey and I get caught, then I get a spanking. Do people even spank kids anymore? I don't think they do. They're afraid the spanking police will come in. But anyway, right or wrong, it's usually not deadly. But anyway, kids think, if I do something wrong and I get caught, then I get in trouble. What do they think if I do something wrong and I don't get caught? Hey, no harm, no foul, right? And so they go on their merry way. I remember hearing somebody talk about how they skipped church to go to a football game, and then they got sick at the football game because they were out in the freezing rain. And so what did they think? Oh, God's punishing me because I did this. I don't think it works that way. Let me ask you a little bit deeper question if you're willing to go a little deeper. Here it is. How can the works of God be displayed in your life? How are the works of God displayed in your life? And I don't want to hear silence. I want to hear some little jabbering going on. This might blow you away, but I do believe this. At least this is how it seems to work in my life. In and through my troubles, when God shows up, so does his glory. It's like, rarely do I have people come up and say, you are so with it. You're so together that God must be at your life. Nobody's ever said that. But people have talked to me after going through a very particularly trying time and seeing the fruit of patience or long-suffering develop in my life, and they say, I have no idea how you do this. And I can honestly say, I'm not doing this. It's God in and through me. And I give glory to God because this trial, which seemed unwanted, undeserved, interminable, God somehow gave glory through this trial. A big idea number one, I want you to maybe write this down somewhere. God is still saying, let there be light. You read that in the book of Genesis, right? The very beginning. He's still saying it. For every person who enters this world, he wants them to experience that light, even if you happen to be a man born blind. Light always wins over darkness. When I was a kid, I used to think, I want to develop an anti-flashlight. You know, something that I could shine on you and you go dark. Right now we laugh at it because it seems so impossible. Maybe somebody will figure that out. But light always wins, doesn't it? You could put yourself back into that mammoth cave and have all the lights go off, but strike a match, and darkness cannot quench that match, cannot put it out. Sometimes the church seems today preoccupied with darkness. You know, they're all, oh, we're in so much trouble. Look at all the bad things going on. No, light always will triumph over darkness. Open your eyes and see how God is working in and through some of the darkest places in the world. I talked just in the last week to Pastor Gerard in Haiti. In his lifetime, and he's 75, I think, right now, he's never seen it so dark socially than it is right now. People are afraid to go to church. People are afraid to go to work. They don't want to go to the bank to cash their check because on the way out they get, roughed up and robbed. He's never seen it so bad. You know where they have worship? Out on the street. Because they will not let the darkness overcome the light. We have church outside because it's a pretty day. Oh, and if it's not too muddy or whatever. But they want to show the power of God in force. You cannot quench the light of Christ. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And he's still bringing light to darkened eyes. And in a dark world where prejudice and fear rule the day, there is good news. Not everybody got it then, and not everybody gets it now, but he still wants us. Remember that it says, while it's still day, we must do the works of God. Don't just keep pointing to something that happened 2,000 years ago. We must be doing it. So let's unpack the spit story. I know you've really been interested in it. How many of you think that spitting is like a baseball thing, right? Totally cool for baseball players to spit whatever is in their mouth. It could be sunflower seeds or used to be tobacco. I think that's taboo now. But anyway, that was like a baseball thing. And so if you're a young kid like I was at one time and you see them spitting, I'm thinking, if I spit, I will become a Major League Baseball player. And so I got pretty good at it. And in fact, I got pretty good at the target practice part of it, And I could hit a tree at 20 feet. I could do all these things. I was very proud of myself. But I found out that spit's kind of a funny, gross thing. It's an amazing thing. It's okay as long as it's in your mouth. But if it comes out of your mouth, don't put it back in. Right? There's something wrong about doing that. There's something very wrong about doing that. But spit, you ever think about what it is? Let's talk about it. What is it spit mostly? Saliva. What is that mostly? Water, which is pretty healthy for the most part. It's 98% water. There's some electrolytes, some antibacterial compounds, believe it or not. That's why when you fall down, you cut yourself, you spit on it, you rub it in there, and you hope and pray that nothing terrible happens. There are enzymes that break starches into sugars. Next time you take communion, just put the bread on your tongue and just let it sit there for a minute, and you will begin to taste sweetness. Not just if the bread is made with sugar, but the starch in the bread will begin to break down into sugars by the enzymes in your mouth. Food actually begins digesting in your mouth way before it hits your stomach. So why this spit and mud bit in the Bible? Well, first of all, spit was not a terrible thing in the Bible times. So don't hold anything against Jesus for doing something as gross as he did. But I wonder if it's maybe linked to that water ritual the Tabernacles festival had, where the high priest would dip a pitcher into the well and carry it up high in front of everybody in a procession, because the water that they're going to pour out is a sign of the judgment of God on Israel. And if Israel passes muster and they do okay, then God will send rain from heaven. And if they really are not good, he will turn them into California. And they'll have forest fires and drought and, all those bad things. That's what they used to think. So Jesus also did something kind of interesting. He puts mud on the guy's eyes. He could have just healed him, right? He could have just, done the Ernest Angley thing or whatever. He could have done a lot of different ways, and the guy could have seen him. But Jesus put the mud on his eyes so he could do what? Tell him to go wash. Go get that stuff off your eyes. Well, you just put that there. I don't think he wanted the guy to see him right now. Jesus was okay if he never got the credit. He was okay. He wanted the man to see. And he sent him to a particular pool. Now, we were in Israel. We got to see the pool of Siloam. It's a giant pool. It was discovered more recently, actually, dug up in 2004, at least beginning to dig up. And it's 225 feet long, almost a football field long. And it was one of those pools that had all the sides you could walk down into it. There were people who would walk in from the middle and go right across, and they would be immersed by walking through the pool that way. And Jesus sent him to a pool named Siloam, and the word Siloam means what? Do you remember? Sent. So Jesus is the sent one, sent from God, and he sends the man to the pool with the same name. Let's pick up in the next verse from John 9. Some of the Pharisees said, well, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, but how can a sinner do such miraculous signs? And so they were divided. Finally, they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he's a prophet. Now, the Jews still did not believe that he had been blind and that he received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Is this your son? Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? I mean, they're grilling the parents and giving them a hard time. Well, we know he's our son, the parents answered, and we know that he was born blind, but how he can see or who opened his eyes, taking a pass on that question because we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself. Now, the parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. So that was another group I said to pay attention to, the parents. Now we got the parents and the Jews or the Pharisees. For they already the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. And that's why the parents said, he's of age, ask him. Now, putting him out of the synagogue would be like putting him out of the local congregation, which was in some ways even worse than being kicked out of the temple, because at least, even if you had issues, you could go to the synagogue. It was like the place where you would hang out probably several times a week. And they didn't want to be ostracized from that group. So a second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man, talking about Jesus, is a sinner. He replied, well, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I do know, what is it? I was blind, but now I see. I mean, how do you argue that? I know that I was blind, but I can see. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I've told you already and you did not listen. Why? Do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? I mean, he's really coming close to getting clocked. I mean, he's really pushing the envelope here. Then they hurled insults at him and said, you're this fellow's disciple. You're a plant in the crowd, right? We are disciples of Moses, and we know that God spoke to Moses. But as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. So your next table talk question is, why would anybody get upset about a man getting healed? Go for it. So I have noticed that sometimes people give an excuse or reason for what they're doing that isn't the real reason. But it sounds better than their real reason. You know, I'm not going to give any real examples because I don't want to get anybody mad at me. But anyway, you say something that would be politically okay and acceptable, but deep down inside, if you told them the real reason you're doing what you're doing, which would be like, well, because I'm a lazy slug and I don't want to get up for church on Sunday, or whatever, you know, I'm just giving a hint. No, I'm just kidding. It's obviously not talking to you guys, right? Because look at this. But no, it's really legalism at its worst, isn't it, going on here? They're upset because they're protecting the law, but I think deep down inside there's something undercurrent here. What if the way of Jesus works better than our way? What if going to Jesus bypasses us and we become obsolete and irrelevant? Nobody will care about us. We'll lose our power. People will stop tithing. You know, all these things that people think. That's their fear. But they mask it by saying, you know, well, we're trying to protect Moses' law as if it really needed it. But you see, Jesus did work. Because the Jews had made very elaborate definitions of what work was. Like, it was against the law to plant. It was against the law to plant because you'd have to plow and put seeds in the ground. And by that definition, spitting would be against the law because if you spit hard enough, you'll move the dust, and it's sort of like plowing. What a stretch, but that's what they said. And it was against the law to make bread because to make bread you had to take water and bread and yeast and what? Work it together and knead it and punch it and all that. And what did Jesus do when he spit in the dirt? Somehow he, kneaded it and worked it into a little ball of mud. And you could do that any day of the week. Come back on Thursday and we can take care of this thing. But he's doing it on the Sabbath. The work was forbidden. Unless it was a matter of life or death. If somebody's drowning, they don't say, I'd love to come and save you, but it's the Sabbath. I'll come tomorrow. They didn't do that. Same way if one of your animals fell into a pit and was going to die, they would be allowed to do that. But not to heal somebody. Not even to accomplish a healing miracle that was proof that Jesus was from God. Jesus denied that suffering is a result of sin. And he showed by what he was doing that God and Jesus still heal on the Sabbath. Jesus is going out of his way to kind of make a point. He could have done this a different day. He literally could have. He could have done it the day before. And they wouldn't have been happy about it, but they wouldn't have been able to throw this Sabbath working thing on him. Jesus is basically saying, my Father and I, we're still working. We still have a job to do. If you notice this interrogation that's going on where the Pharisees are going after this man born blind. They say, as for this fellow, we don't know where he comes from. And the guy answered him, now that's remarkable. You don't even know where he comes from, and yet he was able to open my eyes? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How is that? Is that a good voice for that? How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. The one last thing that he was allowed to do, to be part of the society, the Jewish society, it's like out of the pool. Because we know that God's men don't break the Sabbath. That means they're sinners. And sinners can't give sight to the blind. It's a circular argument, except the problem is this man gave sight to the blind. And he reversed it. What do you have to say about him? Well, he is a prophet. So they go to round two. They bring in the parents. Here the parents get a chance. They're wusses. They're afraid of what? It said it. Do you remember? Being kicked out of they're afraid of losing their social card to go to church, whatever. They don't want to be dragged before a religious tribunal for their son being healed. If nothing else, what would happen in this conversation about the son being healed? Think about this. You got to think a little deeper into this stuff. What did they think caused blindness? Somebody sinned. So now we have this son who was born blind, and we're going to examine the parents really closely. Somewhere in that conversation, they're going to ask questions up close and personal about them. Once more, they ask, how did the healing occur? I really don't know. He spit, he made mud, I washed, voila, here it is. We'll give God the glory, admit it, fess up, this guy's a sinner. Well, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I was blind, but I can see now. What did he do to you, they asked. How did he open your eyes? This is not a question, this is an assault. Why don't people sometimes want to hear the answer? You ever been in a discussion with somebody and they're on the different side and they ask you a question, and before you ever even start to give an answer, they are already launching into some other diatribe. They're going after you for something. There must be another reason, a trick, a coincidence. It can't be good because we didn't orchestrate it. That's what they're thinking. Imagine the feelings this man had gone through. Pitch blackness. Somebody puts spit and mud in your face, tells you to wash, and you're like, gladly, I'm going to get this off my face. And when you come out of the water, I can see. I can now match faces with voices. For the first time in my life, I can match sounds with the animals that are making them, the birds and the dogs. Wow, I can see what the temple looks like gleaming over there. Wow, that's what my parents look like after all these years. Wow, my parents are disowning me after all these years, It's like, what a day he's having, right? Well, let's take a look at one more table talk. In what way did Jesus not break the Sabbath, but actually fulfill it? In what way did Jesus not break the Sabbath, but he actually fulfilled it? I know, I'm making you work hard. What's God's goal for your life? Do you know? Make you rich, have a nice home, 2.5 cars, or is it 2.5 kids, something like that. No, God's will for your life is for you to be whole. And when we're not whole, he wants wholeness for us. Jesus was actually continuing the work of creation on this man's life. He gets kicked out of church for saying Jesus is a prophet, and Jews decided that anyone who thinks Jesus is a godly man, he's out of here. Now, with eyes that are open, he can really see the foolishness of religion. And so let's take a look at those four groups of people that weigh in on this miracle. And remember, I said, not ask you who you feel like you're most like, but who might somebody who knows you pretty well say, yeah, I see that tendency in you. Here we go, the neighbors. The neighbors see this man who is born blind his whole life. They're amazed by the healing. And they ask questions like, how did this man get healed? They didn't really care who did it, right? They were more interested in how it happened. And they were perplexed. And they were confused. And so their attitude toward Jesus was not of rejection or acceptance. It was just like, what? Wow. They're going to weigh in later. Then there's the Pharisees who missed the whole point of the blind man's healing. They want to know how the healing happened rather than what that healing meant. The man said that he put clay on my eyes and told me to wash them, and so now I see. And this gave them the opportunity to fix all of their attention on the tiniest little infraction of breaking the law by plowing with spit on the Sabbath, with working by mixing that spit with a little bit of dirt to make mud. Like, how minute of a violation could you possibly come up with? It made them, they made the people begin to ask this question, like, could he be a sinner? They're part of a culture that we have today called a cancel culture. Cancel culture is one of my biggest pet peeves because they just love to just stamp, cancel, and they don't even get to know anybody because they've just canceled all these things. And that's what these guys are doing. They don't want to know, how is it possible Jesus did what he did? Now let's meet the parents, okay? So these parents are in agreement. Their son was born blind. They're pleading ignorant as to how he gained his sight. And in fact, they pawn it back off on him because why? They were, what? Afraid. They were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews already had this habit of canceling people, of kicking people out of the synagogue, especially those who thought very much of Jesus. And then finally, there's this man born blind, but blind no longer. Now he could see that he would be excommunicated from the synagogue. Now he'd already experienced being kicked out of the temple because of his deformity. Now the deformity is gone. He's actually eligible to go into the temple, and he gets kicked out of the synagogue. Jesus, I love how Jesus, he hunts him down. He hunts him down. Because you see, at this point, the man had never seen him, had he? He probably will never forget the voice of Jesus, but he'd never seen him. And Jesus hunts him down and gives him a chance to believe in the Savior. It's ironic to me that the one who could see most clearly in the story is a man born blind. I don't know which one you would identify most with. But I'm kind of hoping, like I feel myself, I identify with this man born blind. I went through time in my life when I wanted really nothing to do with following God. I mean, I knew God existed. My parents took me to church all the time, but I had no connection. If you ever feel like you're that person who's maybe even right now in a dark time in your life where you don't see much light at the end of the tunnel, where you don't have a lot of goals anymore. I know I've talked to a lot of people after they retire. You know, you look forward to retirement your whole life, and then you retire, and 3 months later, you're like, I don't know what to do. I have no goals. I have no purpose. I don't know what my life's all about. Sometimes the thing we seek to attain, once we get it, we're lost. That doesn't happen with Jesus. I just want you to know that. That does not happen with Jesus. We would be mistaken if we look at this story as kind of a simple little story with a moral and a quaint teaching. Listen, if Jesus is truly the light of the world and we admit that but walk our own way, we are literally in the same group as the Pharisees. If we admit that Jesus is the light of the world and we go our own way and make our own path and do our own thing, and we don't seek out his will, and we don't seek out ways to follow him or to serve him or to be involved in the work that he's doing, we're no different than the Pharisees or the parents of the blind man. Now here's how you can tell. This is where I'm going to tick somebody off. I know. That's what I do. Here's how you know. If you find yourself from time to time getting a bit embarrassed to tell somebody that Jesus is the light of the world, hear me close, then you are not yet one of his disciples. Not yet. If you find yourself embarrassed of Jesus, you might be close, but you're not yet one of his disciples. And I want you to know that there's no more uncomfortable way to live than to be almost a disciple. to love him and love what he does for you and to you and for others. But then going only so close and then you draw back because of shame or embarrassment or public opinion. This is a place we'll never kick you out of for having honest thoughts and questions and ideas about who God is. We'll take you. If you get kicked out of some other place, come on over here. If you have friends who get kicked out of some other place, tell them to come on over here. Because we want you to actively explore what it means to be a disciple. If you can't imagine yourself taking the simplest of Jesus' teachings and apply them to your life, you're not yet a disciple. And if you want an idea of what some of those teachings are, just go and read 3 chapters out of the book of Matthew. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. Just go read them. He talks about things, simple things, like being generous with what he's given you. If you find yourself like, I think I'm going to pass on that. I don't like that generosity thing. Or maybe you find yourself really kind of liking to tease your mind and your lust with watching stuff that's a little bit risque. That Jesus would say, yeah, you don't need any of that. If you find yourself unwilling to forgive somebody, I mean, they just crossed the line. Ain't no way I'm going to forgive that person. Let me just suggest that you're not yet a disciple, but you could be. You could be, and he wants you to be. Jesus is a simple man. He did not scheme and dream of things to do. He simply listened to the Father and did what the Father told him, even if it was dangerous. And so I want to ask, are you willing to be daring enough to follow him? Len Sweet, one of my favorite authors, says, we become wusses. We used to be about doing great and mighty things, healing, bringing the rich and the poor together, bringing light into darkness, making the dead alive. The Church of Jesus Christ used to make waves. Now we can't even make a splash. We cry and whine about every scratch and scrape, and we bellyache about a culture that's going down the toilet without diving headfirst into it to rescue it. We're more likely to dive into a toilet to grab a diamond ring that falls off of our hand than we are to risk going into a dirty, filthy slum. Table talk, last question, and then say grace at your table for what we're about to eat. But ask God this question: is there something I'm missing? Help me to see past my blind spots, because we all have them. And the problem with the blind spot is what? You can't see it. This is why it's so important to be involved in a Christian community. This is why it's so important to be able to be in a relationship with people, whether it's your spouse or not, but somebody who's willing to say, wow, can't believe you said that or did that or, think that. It'd be great, wouldn't it? Go after this one, and then when you're done, say a blessing on the food, and when you're done with that, I think you're going to be allowed to eat, okay? Love you guys.